Pain has a strange reputation. We treat it like a defect, like something went wrong in the system, as if, had we been smarter, tougher, more disciplined, it wouldn't have happened. But assumption is flawed. Pain is not proof that you were weak. It's proof that you were exposed. You stepped into the arena. You tried something that mattered. If you think about it, the people who feel the least pain are often the ones who never really engage. They stay optimized for safety, minimal risk, minimal loss, and also minimal growth. Pain doesn't visit people who hide. It visits people who build, who love, who bet on ideas before they're ready, who trust before guarantees exist. Every meaningful system has failure modes. Rockets explode. Companies collapse. Relationships fracture. That doesn't mean the mission was foolish. It means the mission was real. If you never feel pain, you're probably not pushing the boundary of what's possible for you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Pain is often the cost of admission to progress. You don't get innovation without iteration. You don't get truth without friction. You don't get depth without vulnerability. Pain is the signal that you are operating close to the edge of your current limits, and that's exactly where growth happens. What we usually mislabel as weakness is actually exposure without armor. You allowed yourself to care. You didn't numb out. You didn't disengage. You stayed present long enough for it to hurt. That's not failure. That's courage in its rawest form. Think about it. No one criticizes a prototype for not being the final product. Failure in early versions is expected. It's how the system learned. Yet when it comes to our own lives, we treat every setback as a verdict on our worth. That's a design error. Pain is feedback, not judgment. And the people who have been hurt deeply often develop something rare: range. They understand fragility and endurance at the same time. They can hold complexity. They don't confuse confidence with invincibility. That kind of awareness doesn't come from comfort. It comes from impact. You didn't break because you were weak. You hurt because you were open, because you reached further than what was guaranteed, because you chose something meaningful over something safe. And that choice, whether you realize it or not, already required strength. So if you're carrying pain, don't rush to erase it or explain it away. First, recognize what it proves. You showed up when it mattered. And that means the strength you're looking for has been there longer than you think. What's interesting is that most of the skills that matter most in life aren't taught deliberately. No one sat you down and said, "You're going to learn how to survive uncertainty, disappointment, and loss." There was no curriculum, no certification. It just happened, quietly, repeatedly, and over time you learned how to function inside pressure without even realizing you were being trained. Survival isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like victory. It looks like showing up tired, making decisions when you don't trust your own clarity, continuing forward while questioning everything. You learned how to compartmentalize enough to keep moving, how to problem solve while emotionally compromised, how to operate with incomplete information. That's not weakness. That's an advanced skill set. Think about how systems evolve. They don't improve in perfect conditions. They improve under stress, under constraints, under failure. That's when inefficiencies get exposed and adaptability increases. The same thing happens in people. When life stripped away your assumptions, you were forced to learn what actually matters and what you can live without. You didn't wake up one day suddenly resilient. You became resilient through repetition, through mornings where quitting would have been logical, through conversations you didn't want to have, through losses you didn't advertise. And once you update that information, you don't just move on, you move forward lighter. And when your body learns that the danger is over, your future finally gets the room it deserves. We tend to picture strength as something loud, confident, unshakable. The person who walks into a room certain, decisive, untouched by doubt. That image is appealing, but it's mostly fiction. Real strength rarely announces itself. It doesn't need to. It shows up in restraint, in clarity, in the ability to choose deliberately rather than react impulsively. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are the ones who pause before responding. The ones who don't need to dominate every conversation or prove how capable they are. Not every challenge requires force. Sometimes it requires precision. And precision only comes from awareness. Confidence is often mistaken for strength, but confidence can be fragile. It depends on outcomes, on validation, on things going according to plan. Strength is different. Strength is what remains when the plan breaks. It's the capacity to stay grounded when the external signals are noisy or negative. One of the clearest expressions of strength is boundary setting. Saying no when yes would be easier. Walking away from patterns that feel familiar but destructive. Choosing not to repeat what hurt you, even when repeating it would give you a temporary sense of control. That takes discipline, and discipline is quiet by nature. There's also strength in emotional literacy, in being able to name what you're feeling without being ruled by it, in recognizing fear without letting it dictate your decisions, in understanding anger without outsourcing responsibility to it. Most people never develop this skill because it requires sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. People who've endured pain often learn this the hard way. They realize that reacting doesn't equal power. That volume doesn't equal authority. Over time, they stop needing to prove themselves. They start choosing their responses with intention. That shift alone changes how the world responds to them. What looks like calm from the outside is often the result of internal work no one sees, of learning how to regulate instead of explode, of deciding not to pass your pain forward. That's not weakness. That's leadership at the most fundamental level. And here's the paradox. The quieter your strength becomes, the more stable it is. It's no longer dependent on being seen or acknowledged. It operates regardless of attention. When you stop confusing strength with noise, you start building something far more durable. You stop chasing the appearance of power and start living in the reality of it. Real strength doesn't shout, it holds. One of the most subtle traps pain creates is the illusion that it defines who you are. When something difficult happens, time has a way of collapsing around it. The moment expands. It repeats. And without realizing it, you start introducing yourself to the world from that frozen point, as if the worst chapter somehow became the whole book. That's not how growth works. Pain has gravity. It pulls your identity toward it, but it doesn't get to decide where you end up. The version of you that existed in the middle of the storm was operating under extreme conditions. Limited information. Limited options. High emotional load. Judging that version of yourself as if it had the clarity and resources you have now is fundamentally unfair. Trauma freezes time. It locks certain reactions, beliefs, and expectations in place. But growth restarts the clock. It introduces new data, new perspectives, new capabilities. The problem isn't that people don't change. It's that they keep referencing an outdated version of themselves. Think about any complex system. You wouldn't evaluate its current performance based on an early malfunction. You'd look at how it evolved, how it corrected, how it adapted. Yet we do the opposite with ourselves. And bridges are not destinations. The danger is when people confuse familiarity with truth. Old coping strategies can feel like personality traits. Old fears can feel like intuition. But just because something once protected you doesn't mean it still serves you. Growth requires the courage to update your self-image, even when the old one feels safer. There's also a kind of humility in acknowledging change. In admitting that the story has moved forward, that you've learned things you couldn't have known back then. This isn't denial of the past. It's integration. You don't erase the experience. You contextualize it. When you stop identifying with the moment of pain, you create space for agency. You shift from "this is who I am" to "ah." That distinction changes everything. It restores choice. It restores momentum. You don't owe your past a permanent role in your future. It already did its job. It taught you what it could. The rest is yours to design. You are not frozen in the worst moment. You are defined by what came after. At some point, something changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically. But quietly, you begin to trust yourself in a way you didn't before. Not because you finally got everything right, but because you've seen what happens when things go wrong and you're still here. That's the moment pain stops being just pain and starts becoming authority. Before hardship, confidence is mostly theoretical. It's based on plans, assumptions, and how you expect yourself to behave under pressure. After hardship, confidence is earned. You've watched your own limits fail, and then watched yourself continue anyway. That creates a different kind of self-trust. less flashy, much more reliable. When something almost breaks you, it strips away illusions. You stop relying on optimism alone. You stop believing that things will work out just because they should. Instead, you begin to rely on something internal, your ability to adapt, to recalibrate, to endure uncertainty without collapsing. That's authority, not over others, but over yourself. You no longer outsource your sense of stability to external validation. You've already survived disapproval, loss, and doubt. You know how it feels. And because you've felt it, it has less control over you now. Fear loses leverage once it's been faced directly. This is why people who've been through real difficulty often have a calm certainty about them. Not arrogance, not detachment, just clarity. They don't need guarantees before acting. They don't need permission to trust their judgment. They know they can handle the consequences, whatever they are. Authority doesn't come from being right all the time. It comes from knowing you can recover when you're wrong. That knowledge changes how you make decisions. You move faster. You take smarter risks. You stop over-optimizing for safety and start optimizing for progress. There's also a deeper shift. You stop chasing approval because you've already faced rejection. You stop fearing failure because you've already lived through it. And you realize something critical. The worst-case scenario isn't as powerful as it once seemed. You've already met it. And it didn't end you. And it didn't end you. That doesn't make you reckless. It makes you grounded. You choose intentionally, not impulsively. You understand the weight of decisions because you've felt their impact. That perspective is rare, and it's valuable. It clarified you. It showed you what matters, what doesn't, and what you're capable of when there's no backup plan. That clarity becomes your compass. You don't move forward because you're fearless. You move forward because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes next.